You're listening to episode 5 of the Blindside Rugby Podcast with me, your host, Chris Hattingh. Thank you once again very much for joining me on this weekly rugby podcast. I was going to start off talking about the Crusaders and the Super Rugby Final from the past week, but just breaking news from this morning and very, very sad news. Former Springbok wing James Small has passed away at the age of 50 years. According to Netwerk 24, it is believed that he suffered a heart attack on Wednesday, so early this morning. His mother confirmed the news to Netwerk 24. James Small played 47 tests for the Springboks between 1992 and 1997, and he scored 20 tries. He represented the Lions, or formerly Transvaal, the Sharks and Western Province at provincial level, and he was also part of the Springbok team that won the 1995 Rugby World Cup here in South Africa. He is the third member of that particular Springbok team to have passed away. Ruben Creer, he died from brain cancer in 2010, and Joost van der Westhuizen from motor neuron disease in 2017. So very, very sad news, especially for you rugby fans in South Africa. I'm sure at least all the ones of you would have watched James Small playing for the Springboks and their respective provincial teams, and he was one of my dad's favourite players. So sad news for the older generation of rugby fans, and try and keep the Small family in your thoughts and your prayers in the next few days. It's always obviously very difficult to go through these sorts of things, so I think they would need and appreciate all the possible support that the rugby community can give them. So very sad news to start off this week's episode, but we'll move on to more general news now. For the Welsh rugby team, Alan Wynne-Jones, he has announced that he has signed a contract extension until June 2021 with the Welsh Rugby Union and the Ospreys. So obviously good news for the Welsh rugby team. He's been a stalwart for them for many, many years, and he'll be going to the World Cup this year as part of the Welsh team. So obviously he and the Welsh team will be hoping that they perform well in that tournament. So good news for them, keeping a very experienced player, and I'm sure inspirational figure for the younger guys, keeping him around in the setup there, with a view obviously at bringing in younger guys. It's always good to have the experienced ones around to help them along. Then, in terms of rugby results this past week, nothing, not as much as in previous weeks, so this won't be as long of an episode as some of the previous ones have been. The biggest news was obviously from the Super Rugby Final, which the Crusaders won, where they beat the Jaguares by 19 points to 3. Obviously, for me as a Crusaders fan, pure elation. I probably should have recorded this podcast straight after that game. It wasn't amazing running rugby from both teams. It was played in not very difficult conditions, but there was dew on the grass and the ball knocked on quite a lot, and not as high scoring a game as we would hope would happen. But for me, I guess in finals rugby, as with any sort of final knockout stage of a tournament, you need to take your points where you can get them, and the Crusaders did that very well. The Jaguares, for me, made more mistakes than they have in previous weeks. I don't know if that was part of the traveling, like the travel fatigue, if it was the pressure of the occasion, maybe it was the different conditions to what they're used to, but they didn't play as well as they have in previous weeks. They made more mistakes, probably more like the Jaguares of, not of old, I want to say, but more like the Jaguares were sort of used to, with making mistakes. Their discipline was still fine, but they simply made too many knock-ons. They built up pressure a few times on the Crusaders, but they couldn't really, they couldn't capitalize on any territory and possession that they had. For the Crusaders, it's their third Super Rugby title in a row and their 10th overall, which is incredible. A ridiculously amazing dynasty that they've built in Christchurch, the most successful Super Rugby team of all time. And again, for me, just, very, very happy that they managed to win. Even if it had only been by 1 point, I would have been thrilled that they pulled it through. So good times for me as a Crusaders fan. I can't really complain about the lack of silverware and titles. There was a while when the Crusaders went through a dry patch for them. They didn't even make the playoffs at different stages throughout the years under coach Todd Blackadder. But obviously now with Scott Robertson, he's created a very good environment, bringing in younger players, keeping the old guys involved. I think there's a culture of responsibility and also freedom So players are allowed to express themselves, and if they make mistakes, then they're held accountable for it. So that it's sort of a player empowerment. What can we call it? Player empowerment approach. You give them sort of broad structures to operate in, and then within that they have freedom to play the game on the day as they see fit, to handle conditions as they arise, and then to build from there and learn from their mistakes. Now for the Crusaders moving forward, Kieran Reid, Matt Todd and a few others are now done with the Crusaders. They are moving on. I think Kieran Reid will probably retire from rugby after this year's World Cup. Sam Whitelock is also now on sabbatical from the Crusaders until I think 2021 as well. So after the Rugby World Cup with the All Blacks, he'll take some time off or go play in Japan. I'm not too sure of the details yet. So there's going to be a big departure of experience there. So we'll have to see if they can handle it. Interestingly, on that note, it's not just players leaving, but Ronan O'Gara, the former Irish fly half, he's been coaching at the Crusaders, part of Scott Robertson's background staff, and he's specifically the backline coach. So he's departing after the season to go, and he's going to be the head coach at French top 14 club La Rochelle. And just this past week, he said some interesting stuff after the final. He said he's backing Scott Robertson, the Crusaders coach, his, and I quote, glass full attitude to ensure the Crusaders dynasty endures. So the impression I get from the outside is that Robertson isn't really going to focus or talk much about players who are leaving. He's going to talk about the next man up, taking responsibility, owning his role, and then fulfilling that role. So he's very much future-oriented. In another thing that Ronan O'Gara, he also talked about how working with the Crusaders reaffirmed his love of rugby. So hopefully we'll see him continue in coaching, and maybe one day he'll coach Ireland or some other national team. So it's good, obviously, that the Crusaders, they're having a good influence on their own players, but now on coaches and players who might leave them and go overseas. It seems to be a very good environment in which to work. Just on the final itself, on the game itself, it was up and down in the first half, I thought, and the Crusaders just did better at taking their opportunities. They didn't do anything very special, no like crazy backline moves or fancy New Zealand rugby that we might be used to. Again, that might be a result of the conditions. And on that note, my player of the week and probably player of the tournament, if not Adi Savia from the Hurricanes, I'd give it to Richie Monga, the fly half of the Crusaders. During the whole playoff run, he succeeded with all his attempts at goal, so didn't miss any kicks. That's 17 out of 17, which is very good with that sort of pressure on you. And I think he again reaffirmed his case to be selected as the starting fly half for the All Blacks in the World Cup, which I hope will be the case. And on that note of his improved goal kicking, because he did have troubles during the season, he said that a few harsh words from Ronan O'Gara was apparently just what he needed to address his goal kicking. He landed just 4 of his first 12 attempts early in the year, which prompted Ronan O'Gara to take action, and it obviously worked. So in the final on Saturday against the Jaguares, he slotted all 5 of his shots at goal in that victory. And as I mentioned, he succeeded in all his goal kicks throughout the playoffs, when it counts the most for your fly half to take whatever points are on offer. When you get a penalty, you take those 3 points. You shouldn't always go for the try line and try and get 7 points, because stuff like knock-ons might happen and you simply might not get it. So, good to see that O'Gara had this sort of influence, this shaping influence on Richie Monga. Hopefully he internalized it and will use it going forward. I hope, obviously, for the Crusaders and the All Blacks' sake. And I know there's concerns around Super Rugby attendance figures, the excitement of it. I know Sanzar is going to try and change things from next season, so maybe that'll help. It might not be good for competition in rugby that the Crusaders have now won 3 in a row. Obviously, as a Crusaders fan, I'm very happy, but I guess you have to keep in mind these other things. I don't know how they're going to fix necessarily all of the problems. It might just also be a reflection of people not being that keen on watching every game of rugby every week anymore. But there's always, I think, solutions moving forward. And hopefully the 3 different countries, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, can come to the table and figure out, the best way to draw people to watch the game. Then on our weekly All Black spotlight for this week, I just wanted to mention that Ian Foster, he's one of All Blacks coach Steve Hansen's assistants. He is, well, I don't know if I want to say officially, maybe unofficially joined the race to be the next All Blacks coach. He announced that he was very keen to carry on but beyond his 8th year as an assistant. So he's obviously been in the background for a long time under Steve Hansen, and before him, Graham Henry. Been part of the All Blacks coaching setup for 8 years now, so a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge on how things work. I think he comes with a lot of technical knowledge and hopefully management skills as well, because you can't have the technical expertise, also the psychological side. So interesting to me. I think it might be between him and Scott Robertson, the coach from the Crusaders, for the All Blacks job. So we'll have to see what happens. But good to see that he's at least keen to continue to stay in the setup. It's vital to keep coaches like him with his serious amount of knowledge and expertise and technical know-how. He might then be the head coach, but he also has a lot of expertise in coaching different areas of the game, different players' positions and roles and responsibilities. So it's vital for the All Blacks as a whole to keep him, in the setup moving forward after Steve Hansen leaves. And on that note, I'll end this week's episode. Thank you once again for joining me. I hope you had a good time listening to the episode. As I mentioned at the beginning on James Small, please try and keep him and his family in your thoughts and prayers. Just sort of final admin. Please remember to follow me on Twitter and also follow Podmedia. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it. You can, if you're listening to it on iTunes, for example, you can find it on other places as well, including Spotify. So please subscribe wherever is most convenient for you and download the episode, share it with your friends, let them know. And then, we'll talk again next week. I think things will start picking up news-wise again, running up to the World Cup, maybe in terms of squads and team selection. Obviously, we have the Rugby Championship to look forward to. That's coming up very soon, as well as the Currie Cup. So don't worry. There's always going to be a lot of rugby action around, maybe too much for us to all consume sometimes, but that's what I try and do for you here. Try and cover as much as I can, so that you don't have to go to different places to get all your rugby news. But thank you once again for joining me. I hope you all have a good week ahead and a good weekend, and I'll talk to you again next week. Cheers.